Welcome back to Spring Into Java. I am your host, Glabe. So, in today's video, we are going to create a way to handle the input that our users submit when they hit the submit button. We're going to make a data transfer object, or DTO, that is going to represent this information so that we can then send it over the network. We're going to create a network interface so that we can submit HTTP requests, post requests, to our back end. We are then going to also extend that into a registration network so that we can make two types of post requests. One to check if an account exists, the other to create it if it doesn't. So, if you're ready to fill up that cup of coffee, sit down and learn, let's dive on in. The first thing we're going to need to do is create a form model input listener inside of our listeners package. Once we have created this, we're going to need to extend the listener adapter from the JDA package. And now in here, we're simply going to look to override one of the methods that is known on model interaction. So if we just start typing that out, there we go. IntelliJ is very good for that. Now in here, we're going to want to make a redundant check to make sure that the user is not null. This is something that we're going to be generally doing every time that we create a handler or a class that requires the input from the user. We're going to be making a redundant check to make sure that that user is not null, just to prevent any future issues in our code. So now in here, we're going to need to get the ID of the model. So we're going to store that as a string, and we're just going to simply call this the form. And this will be equal to the event.getModelID, which we have created in the past video. This would be in the register command. We had created a model registration form, and we gave it the ID of registration form. So in here, we just simply now want to check if this form is equal to what we're expecting, which is this ID. And if so, then we're going to need to make a new registration form and then handle that submission. So, first thing, we will need to create a model handler interface that simply has one function: handle model submission. So let's go on and create a new package, and we're going to call this handlers. And inside here, we'll make another interface, and this will be the model handler. All right. And now this again is just going to simply be a functional interface, and that just simply means that there is only one function that is inside of this interface. And this is just going to be handle model submission. And we're going to look to take in the model interaction event. And we're just going to call that event. Alright, so that's it for here. Now we need to implement this. So what we're going to do here is now make an implementations class, implementations package inside of the handlers. This is just simply where we're putting the concrete classes. So in here we're going to make a registration. This is going to be a registration form, and it is going to need to extend that model handler that we had just made. And once you've extended that, make sure to implement the method so that we can handle this. And now make sure that it implements, not extends. This is not inheritance, it is implementation. So let's jump back to our form model input so that we can quickly get rid of this error. This is going to make a new registration. And we are just going to then handle it and pass in the event that came in from our user. There. That is how we now are listening for any form models that come in. If they have the ID of a registration form, we're now going to be simply calling our handle method inside of the registration form. And in here we will be doing, yet again, redundant checks to make sure that the user is not null, whoever is submitting the form. And from here, we're now going to need to look to get the fields from this form. So in here, we're providing the display name or username, an email address, their first and last name, and then we're going to just be taking in whatever they entered for a password. So we need to get those fields, which are simply just a list of model mapping. So let's go ahead and create a list to store our model mapping. And this we're just simply going to call fields because it's the fields of the form that they're submitting. And now we're going to be equal to the event.getInteraction and get values. This is going to get you a list of all of the input that the user has entered. So now we can just simply create a few variables here. For example, string username, and this was the first field in our list of input. So we're just going to go ahead and say fields dot get 0 because it is our first index in that list, and we want to get this as a string, and that will return the value of that field as a string. So now I'm just going to pause the video here while I make these redundant additions. Alright, so now once we have all of our fields created, we're going to need a way to put these somewhere. So now we're going to create our data transfer object. So let's jump up here and we're just going to create a new package, and we're going to call this one network. And in here we're going to create another folder to hold our DTOs, or data transfer objects. Now we can go ahead and create a registration form, because this is just going to simply registration form DTO, and in here we are going to give this a couple of quick annotations, just getters and setters. And we're going to drop down and make a couple of private fields here, just so that we can store the information that we're looking to collect here. So now there's not a whole lot of information that we're looking to collect, just simply the username, email, first name, last name, and password. So we're just going to make a couple of quick little strings here that are going to be our values, and these are all going to be initiated to nothing just to start out. We're again just going to be using the username, email, first name, and last name. And of course we're also going to need to slip in that password. And we can go ahead and make these all private. Jumping back over to our model input here, we're now going to look to create that model. So this would just be the registration form DTO, and this would just be our DTO. And we'll just make that a new registration form. And now we're looking to fill it up with a little bit of data. So we're going to say our data transfer object dot set username is going to be equal to the username. And if we go ahead and next change up the email, we'll just make sure that that's set email. Now again, we're then now going to do the same thing for the first name and the last name. So DTO dot set first name to first name, DTO dot set last name, and finally get that password. Now we'll make sure that we have this tidied up a little bit just to kind of easier to read. Next, we're going to need to create a way to now send that over the network. So, next thing we're going to need to create here is going to be the network interface. So let's go ahead and in our network class, we're going to create a new class. This is going to be an interface, and we're just going to make this our network. So Glabay Studios. This will just be the Glabay Studios network. We're going to apparently fix up the packaging because we're not in a DTO. And we'll just, there we go. We'll let our idea do their work for us. Next, we're going to need to fill this with a couple of things. The first thing we're going to need to do is make an HTTP request. This will be an HTTP post. So here we're going to go ahead and make a private HTTP post, and we're just simply going to call this get HTTP post. And this is going to take in a string which will be our URL, and we will be creating that in a later video. So inside of here we need to go ahead and make a post object. We're just simply going to call it HTTP post, and this will be a new post with the URL that we're looking to pass in. Now we're going to need to add a couple of things here. Here is where you can go ahead and set some headers if you want to make a few different specifications. For example, we're going to be making 2 HTTP header requests. We're going to be adding a header, string and value. So this is going to be where we are going to be letting our HTTP client know that these are going to be application/JSON, and we're going to be passing these in as the accept headers, because we just want to let it know that this is the thing that you should be accepting. And we're also looking to be able to create a content type so that we can our receiving end will know what to expect. Now there are other things you can do in here. You can also stick in a bearer token if you're looking to pass over a user's JOT token, or if you were looking to maybe use some sort of a custom API key that you want to add in here. This will be the prime place to add in your HTTP headers. And of course, once we've created that, we're just simply going to return the HTTP post request. Next, we want to be able to send a data object that we're going to map into a string entity. So we're going to make a default HTTP post. And this one is going to be getting an HTTP post with a body. So get HTTP post. And this is going to be with a body. So in here we're just going to take in the string of the URL, and then we're going to be taking in the string entity, which is going to be the body of our HTTP post request. Now in here we are going to be creating an HTTP post. This is going to be our HTTP post, and this is just going to simply be taking advantage of the first method that we had created to get us a post request that is, so we don't have to more or less rewrite the headers that we're going to be sticking into every post. So you can of course add other headers in here from this if you want to be more specific on only accepting, say, anything that's posting a body should have maybe an API key with it so that you can filter out some requests. This would be sort of the area where you would then add in an API key to that header, that if you wish. If you do want to know a little bit more about that or want me to go on a little bit more about that, I will be explaining more about those and adding headers, reading headers through the Spring framework once we get into the future videos. So that's something to look forward to. Now in here we simply want to attach this string entity to our HTTP post. So we're going to take the post and we are going to set its entity to the body that we had just passed in. That would be our string entity is now the entity that will be attached, or the object that's going to be attached to our post. So now we will just simply return the HTTP post. And now if we want to, say, wait for a reply, because generally this is just going to simply get you the HTTP post that you can then tell the closable HTTP client that we're going to create to just simply execute and go. And that's going to be very much like sending out a UDP packet, where it's just going to send it out, doesn't really care, it's just posting something out to the universe. But what if we wanted to confirm that what we posted was something that was successful? Well, we can simply create an HTTP response that will take in the required fields and wait, and we will then be able to get what the backend tells us. So let's go ahead and make ourselves another default, and this one is going to be to submit an HTTP post, and this one is going to be with a body, and it's also going to await a response or a reply. So next we are going to need to take in the URL that we're looking to pass. We're going to need to take in the string entity that the user is, what did I click there? Take in the string entity that the user is passing as the body, and we want to have the closable HTTP client that we're going to use to submit this. So this is going to be done in a way through, we're going to be doing it through a try with resources in our more foundational class. So for now this is just going to simply take in as a parameter the closable if I can type, closable HTTP response, no, closable HTTP client, and that is going to be our HTTP client. Now this will throw an error, or does have the potential to throw an error, so this is going to be why we're going to be wrapping this in a try with resources, just so that we can be more secure about this. So this does throw an IO exception, which is just simply an input-output exception that could happen in anything. So once we are in here, we're simply just going to return the HTTP client after it executes the request that we're going to simply get request with body that we created earlier, pass in the URL, oh my goodness, pass in the URL and the body, and then simply make sure that you, of course, make this default an HTTP response so that it all works out well. So now we have a way that we can submit a request and then wait and listen for the reply to assure that what we're getting back is working. So next, we need a way to map our strings or our Java objects into an HTTP string that we can send over the network as a JSON object. So we're going to need to create two more methods here, but before we do that, we have to make sure to hop over to our pom.xml because we're going to need to add in a dependency. So jumping into your POM, we're going to need to add another versioning up here. This is just going to be the Jackson version was what we're going to call it. It is from the faster XML Jackson data format package. So just and the version that we're going to be using for this one is going to be 2.13. And once you have that, we're going to need to jump down to our dependency section so that we can actually add it in. So we're going to create a new dependency. The artifact ID is Jackson dash data format dash YAML. And this is from the com.fasterxml Jackson data format. And we are going to specify the version of this as our version we've defined up above. So that would be our Jackson version, not Java version. Apparently I have an extra dash in there. Apparently I didn't spell Jackson right. So make sure you spell that apparently correct. So we're going to use our Jackson.version to pull in our faster XML. And while that is pulling out all of our dependencies for us, we're going to take a dive back to our network interface, where we're going to create a couple more methods in here. We're going to create one that is going to be simply converting a POJO, or a plain old Java object, into a JSON string. So we're going to start out by making this a string that we're going to go with simply get app object as JSON. And this is just going to take in a regular Java object as the parameter. Now, this also is going to throw a possible error, which is a JSON processing exception. seems to be, there we go, it throws it, not, it throws it, I'm not telling it to throw. And now this is going to return our object mapper, and we're going to look to write this as a, doesn't really matter if you're looking to write it as a pretty or not pretty, if you would, format. For this sake, I just happen to like to write things out with pretty JSON because I feel like it is just a little bit cleaner to read than your typical one string that wraps around itself. So we're going to ask this to write with the default pretty printer, and we're going to want to tell it to take in the value as a string, and the value is just the object that we're passing in. So make sure that we make this a default method so we can use this throughout the project. Next, we're going to need to make our first method that's going to take advantage of this is going to be the string entity. So now we want to be able to just simply give our project or give our method a plain old Java object and have that convert it into something that we can submit over the network. So we're going to create a default string entity, and this is going to be our way of getting the string entity from a data transfer object. So we're going to go get string entity from DTO, and this is just simply going to take in a Java object that is our data transfer object. And in here we are going to need to make a try catch. This is simply because our method that we're looking to get requires us to do so, because we're going to be returning the new string entity, and that new string entity is going to be that of getting the object as a JSON. So now we're going to pass in our data transfer object, or our POJO, and make sure that we surround that with the try catch. And I'm just going to collapse those together so that it looks a little cleaner. There. So now we can pass in any data transfer object to this method, and it will return us with the proper string to submit that over the network. So now when we just simply look to pass in our objects to a post request, we'll be making a call to this string entity from data transfer object, and you can see that in a future video. So the next thing that we're looking to do is to create one more thing in this class, and this is going to be the HTTP client. So earlier we had made a request that will take in a closable HTTP client. So now here we are looking to make a default method here, which will simply be the closable HTTP client, and this is just going to be get HTTP client. Now this is just going to be a quick return of an HTTP client builder, which we are then going to create and build. Simple as that. Alright, so next we are going to look to move in to create a more concrete class of an almost more concrete interface of our class here. We're going to need to make a registration network that is going to extend the GLABE Studios network. This is going to allow us to create a couple of functions in here, which will simply check if the user has an account, and if so, don't let them create an account. So, and then we're going to make a method to create an account, so that if they do not have one, we're going to send off an HTTP request to make one. So, first thing we need to do is make a registration network. and this is going to be an interface that simply extends the GLABE Studios network. So in here we're going to make our first method, which is going to be a default Boolean. And the reason that this one is going to be a Boolean is because we're just simply looking to check if user exists. And we're going to be taking in the registration form that we have the registration data form, registration form DTO, and that is going to be the object that we're looking to check. So we're going to be then creating a way that we can send that and wait for a reply. So in here we're going to make a try with resource. So simply try, and this is going to be a closable HTTP client, and it's going to be called HTTP client. Now this is going to be the get HTTP client that we had just made. Now in here we're going to need to listen for a response. So we're going to create an HTTP response. We're just going to simply call it a response, and this is going to be the function that we had made earlier, submit HTTP request, and we're simply going to pass in a URL that we have not created yet, but we will be creating. We are going to now pass in our we're now going to pass in our string entity from the DTO object that we have, which is just going to be that registration form. So we're going to pass that registration form in here, and finally we're going to take in the HTTP client. Now, next we're going to be looking to, let's clear up that error. So first off here we're just going to make a catch for an IO exception. Okay. There. Just to clean that up a little bit. So now we're looking to make a try that this response, we're going to try to send this response, and of course we just want to make sure that if the object that we get back is not null, make sure that it's not null, not a nulled response, because if it's not, we want to handle it. And what are we looking to handle with that? Well, first off, we want to know what the status is. STATUS. Get that right, Mike. So the status we're going to be looking to get from the response by asking for the status line and then asking for the status code. This will give us whether it's a 404, 403, 40 what, not. Okay, so this will allow us to do some finer checking down here, so that, for example, if we've sent this off and maybe the account exists, well, we're going to return back with an HTTP response of probably already exists. And that will then tell us here, we can make a quick check, so if the status happens to be, let's make an example here. So if the object's equal, and we're looking at the status, and we're looking to see if it is an HTTP status of either, let's say that we find out that it was an SC already, no, we'll say there is one created. There is an account. So for here, we're simply going to be returning back false. There's an account that already exists. So we can either make a log of that by printing something out, like maybe we want to print out to the console that maybe the registrant, maybe the registered user, registering user already exists, and we'll just simply return false. And apparently I need to spell that right. There we go. So now the registering user already exists, and it's going to return false, so that we know that it's false. And maybe the next one here, this was SC OK, or yeah, we'll go with OK. So this will just return if everything's okay, then we're all true. And maybe we'll just simply say here that registered a new user. And finally down here, of course, if there's any sort of an error, maybe we'll just do e.print, just so that we can get that error out to the console. And of course, if all else fails, we're just simply going to return null, because this shouldn't really happen, but if we happen to some reason go to the end of there, we're just going to return null. But for the most part, we're going to check to see if the user exists. We will create the mapping for that, or the URL for that, in a future video. But for now, this here will make an HTTP request, post request, to our backend server, and then it's going to simply await for what the reply is. Now, we're going to make another request that's going to simply be sending off that user to create the account. And it's going to be basically looking like the exact same thing here. It's just we're going to be sending it to a different model. And for now, for all intents and purposes, we are just simply going to just copy and paste this for now, and we will change it up a little bit later. This one here is not going to be a Boolean though, this is going to be a string, because we're going to pass back a message once we get it from the user. And this will be to create new account. And then we're just going to send in the data transfer object. And for now, we're just simply going to return either something went wrong, or sorry, if it does return that the user was successfully created, we'll just simply put out that we've simply created a successfully created account. And then we will change up our SC OK to an SC conflict. So maybe something went wrong. Alright, and for now that'll be alright for this. We are now going to be looking to go into our registration form, and in here we're looking to now submit this to our backend. So let's go ahead and make a quick check. We want to know if the user exists. So if first off, we need to have this working with our registration network. So it's going to need to extend our registration network. So because it's implementing our model handler, we'll just simply add in at the end of this that it's also going to be implementing the registration network. Now we're going to jump down. After we've created our data transfer object, we need a way to then post that. So now what we're going to check and see if the user exists. That's the data transfer we just made. And if they exist, we're simply going to need to not send it to them. Maybe here we will reply to them that the user already exists within our universe. So now we can just simply event.reply, and here we can just simply reply with a message. This can just be a simple string telling the user that, sorry, it seems as if an account with that name already exists. And maybe we'll just simply make this one here into a private message, so that only the person who sent the command will see it. So we'll just set this to true and make sure to queue that answer, or to queue that up. Otherwise it will not send, and you'll be wondering what the hell's going on. So if the user already exists, we're just simply going to do this and then return out of everything. So going forward, we're assuming that the user is a new user and that they do not exist. So here is where we're then going to simply tell the network to go ahead and create a new account. So simply again, pass in that data transfer object. And ideally what we would like to do here when we're creating a new account would be to listen for the response that comes back. And at this point it's just simply going to say successfully created account or something went wrong. So if we could jump back into our registration form, we can technically just print this as a reply. So we'll go ahead and copy this, drop it down here, and because this is a string, we'll just replace the message. So now if the account was created for them, they're just going to get a message back saying successfully created the account or something went wrong, and then you'll get a message from them. So in our next videos, because this is getting a little bit long, we're going to go ahead and show you what this looks like in play and how everything works. We'll run over kind of explaining a few things, and then we're going to dive into Spring so that we can create the backend mappings or the URLs that we're looking to use for this. So if you're interested to see how you can now pass this over the network and model it into something that we can store into a database, check out our next video that's coming out soon, if it hasn't already in your area. And if you find this was helpful in any way, please give me a like, and if you happen to want to be aware of our next videos and when they come out, you can go ahead and hit that submit button as well, or that subscribe button as well. You can also find me on GitHub, as this project is completely open source. The link to the GitHub will actually be in the description. Thank you very much for your time, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.